In the heart of Seoul's bustling Gangnam district, where glass towers pierce the sky and cherry blossoms paint the streets in delicate pink hues each spring, lived a man whose life had been carefully constructed around routine and responsibility. Min Junho was 34 years old, impeccably dressed in his tailored suits, and known throughout his architectural firm as the man who never missed a deadline and never showed emotion. But beneath that perfectly composed exterior lay a heart that had been shattered 5 years ago, leaving him to navigate life with the precision of an architect's blueprint, measured, calculated, and safe. Every morning at exactly 7:15, Junho would step out of his luxury apartment building, briefcase in hand, when he would hear the sound that had become as much a part of his routine as his morning coffee. A small voice calling out from the playground across the street, bright and melodious like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Appa, push me higher." The little girl on the swing set had captured his attention from the very first day he'd noticed her, though he could never quite explain why. She couldn't have been more than 4 when he first saw her, with pigtails that bounced as she ran and a smile that seemed to light up even the gloomiest Seoul mornings. Now, at 5 years old, she had grown into a spirited child whose laughter echoed across the small neighborhood playground like music. But it wasn't just her joy that drew his gaze each morning. There was something about her features, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the stubborn set of her small chin when she was determined to master the monkey bars, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. These details tugged at something deep in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name and didn't dare explore. The woman who brought her to the playground each morning was clearly struggling. Junho had watched from a distance as she juggled her phone, presumably dealing with work calls, while trying to keep an eye on her daughter. Her clothes, though clean and neat, had seen better days. Her shoes were worn at the heels, and she carried herself with the weight of someone bearing responsibilities far beyond her years. Her name, he had learned from overhearing conversations with other parents, was Yoon So-young. She was 28, worked multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet, and loved her daughter with a fierceness that was visible in every protective glance, every gentle correction, every tired smile she managed when her little girl ran to her with some new discovery. The child's name was Yoon Ha-rin, and she was, without question, the brightest light in that small corner of Seoul. She approached life with the fearless curiosity of someone who hadn't yet learned that the world could be disappointing. She made friends with every dog they encountered, attempted to have conversations with the elderly men who played chess in the park, and had an uncanny ability to find 4-leaf clovers in patches of grass where others saw only weeds. For weeks, Junho had been content to observe from afar, telling himself that his interest was merely that of someone who appreciated seeing a child so full of life. But as autumn painted the Seoul streets in brilliant oranges and reds, circumstances conspired to bring their worlds colliding together in a way that would change everything. It was a particularly rainy October morning when Junho saw So-young sitting on the park bench, her head in her hands, while Ha-rin played quietly nearby, sensing her mother's distress with the intuition that children possess. Something about the defeated slope of So-young's shoulders moved him in a way that surprised him. Before he could talk himself out of it, he found himself crossing the street. "Excuse me," he said gently, his voice barely audible over the sound of rain pattering against the playground equipment. "I'm sorry to intrude, but you seem... Are you all right?" So-young looked up, startled, her eyes red-rimmed with unshed tears. For a moment, she seemed to debate whether to maintain the facade that everything was fine, but something in Junho's expression, a genuine concern without judgment, made her shoulders sag with relief. She began, then stopped, glancing at Ha-rin to make sure she was still occupied with her toys. "I lost one of my jobs today. The cafe where I worked nights closed down unexpectedly. I don't know how I'm going to make rent this month." The words tumbled out as if a dam had burst, and Junho found himself sitting beside her on the damp bench, offering his handkerchief and listening as she explained her situation. She was a single mother, had been since Ha-rin was born. The father had left when she told him about the pregnancy, and she'd been managing on her own ever since. She worked as a cleaning lady in office buildings during the day, had worked at the cafe in the evenings, and did freelance data entry whenever she could find it. "I'm sorry," she said, accepting his handkerchief and dabbing at her eyes. "You don't even know me, and here I am falling apart in front of you. I'm usually better at holding it together." "Sometimes we all need someone to listen," Junho replied, surprising himself with the gentleness in his own voice. "And for what it's worth, you seem like you're doing an incredible job. Your daughter is obviously very happy and well cared for." As if summoned by their conversation, Harin approached them, her small brow furrowed with concern. "Ioma, why are you sad?" So, Young quickly composed herself, pulling her daughter close. "Ioma's just tired, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Harin, with the directness that only children possess, turned to Junho. "Are you the nice man who watches us play every morning?" Junho felt heat rise in his cheeks, embarrassed to be caught in what might seem like stalking behavior. I walk by here on my way to work. I couldn't help but notice how happy you always seem." "Do you like playgrounds?" Harin asked, completely unaware of the adult awkwardness surrounding the conversation. "I used to when I was little," Junho admitted. "Do you want to play with me? Yoma gets tired, but I have lots of energy." Before he knew it, Junho found himself being dragged toward the swing set, his expensive suit and leather shoes seeming absurdly out of place among the playground equipment. But as he pushed Harin on the swing, listening to her delighted squeals and chatter about everything from her stuffed rabbit to her favorite flavor of ice cream, something inside his chest began to thaw. That afternoon, after he'd returned to his office and tried unsuccessfully to focus on architectural drawings, Junho found himself thinking about So Young's situation. He had more money than he knew what to do with, lived alone in an apartment, far too large for one person, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt compelled to reach out to someone. The next morning, he arrived at the playground with a proposition. "I have a suggestion," he said to So Young, who looked surprised to see him return. "I know this might sound presumptuous, but I heard what you said yesterday about your situation. I have a large apartment, more space than I need. If you're interested, you and Harin could stay there temporarily, just until you get back on your feet. No strings attached, no rent required. Just think of it as one neighbor helping another." So Young stared at him as if he'd suggested they fly to the moon together. I couldn't possibly accept something like that. We barely know each other." "You're right, we don't know each other well," Junho agreed. "But sometimes life puts people in our path for a reason. I can provide references from my work, background checks, whatever would make you feel comfortable. I travel frequently for work, so you'd have plenty of privacy. And Harin seems to enjoy having someone new to play with." It took 3 more conversations and a week of careful consideration before So Young agreed to his offer. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just a month or 2 until she could save enough money for a deposit on a new apartment. Neither of them expected how quickly their lives would become intertwined, or how natural it would feel to share the same space. Junho's apartment was a masterpiece of modern design, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the Seoul skyline. But Harin's presence transformed it from a showpiece into a home. Suddenly, there were colorful drawings taped to the refrigerator, small shoes by the door, and the sound of laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. So Young proved to be an excellent housemate, tidy, respectful, and incredibly grateful for the opportunity to stabilize her life. She insisted on contributing however she could, taking over the cooking and cleaning despite Junho's protests. Her meals filled the apartment with warmth and delicious aromas that made him realize how empty his life had become, sustained by takeout and convenience store meals. But it was Harin who truly brought magic into his carefully ordered world. She would wait by the door each evening for him to come home from work, launching herself into his arms with uninhibited joy. She showed him her drawings, told him elaborate stories about her stuffed animals, and insisted on helping him with everything from sorting his mail to watering his plants. Junho Oppa, she had decided to call him, the title feeling natural on her tongue and warming his heart in ways he hadn't expected. Within a month, Their evening routine had evolved into something that felt remarkably like a family. Junho would arrive home to find Harin playing in the living room while So-young prepared dinner. They would eat together, Harin chattering about her day at the local daycare that Junho had quietly arranged and paid for. After dinner, while So-young did dishes, Junho would help Harin with her simple homework or read her stories before bedtime. These moments felt both foreign and familiar to him, as if he were remembering something he'd forgotten rather than learning something new. The way Harin would curl up against him while he read, the trust in her eyes when she asked him to check for monsters under her bed, the pride on her face when she mastered tying her shoes with his patient guidance. All of it felt like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. So, Young watched these interactions with wonder and growing affection. She had been prepared for awkwardness, for the inevitable tension that comes when strangers share living space. Instead, she found herself falling into an easy rhythm with Junho, their conversations flowing naturally over shared meals and quiet evenings after Harin had gone to bed. "You're so good with her," she told him one evening as they watched Harin sleep. Her small form peaceful under the blankets in the bedroom, they'd converted into a perfect little girl's sanctuary. "She's easy to love," Junho replied, then caught himself, wondering if the admission revealed too much. But So-young only smiled. "She's never had a father figure before. I worried about that, but seeing her with you, she's blooming like a flower in spring." As autumn turned to winter, their temporary arrangement stretched beyond the original timeline, but none of them seemed eager to change it. So-young had found a better job at a marketing firm, her skills with data analysis finally being put to proper use. She was saving money steadily, but the apartment search had somehow moved to the back burner. Meanwhile, Junho found himself restructuring his life around their schedule. He declined after-work social events to come home for dinner. He rearranged business trips to minimize time away. He discovered the joy of Saturday morning pancakes and Sunday afternoon walks along the Han River, Harin skipping between him and So-young, like the bridge connecting their separate worlds. It was during one of these walks, on a crisp December afternoon with the first snow of winter beginning to fall, that Harin asked the question that would change everything. "Junho Oppa, were you ever married?" The question came out of nowhere, as children's questions often do. So-young started to scold her daughter for being too personal, but Junho held up a gentle hand. "It's okay," he said, then knelt down to Harin's level. "Yes, I was married once, a long time ago." "What happened to your wife?" Junho was quiet for a long moment, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. We had some problems. Sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt each other very badly. We decided it was better to live apart." Harin nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness she applied to all important matters. "Did you have children?" This question hit him like a physical blow, and So-young immediately saw the pain that flashed across his features. "Harin, that's enough questions," she said firmly. But Harin, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult emotion, persisted. "I just think you would be a really good appa. You take care of me and Yoma like a real appa would." That night, after Harin had been tucked into bed with extra stories and kisses, Junho found himself telling So-young the truth he'd kept buried for 5 years. "I was married," he began, staring out at the Seoul skyline glittering in the winter darkness. "Her name was Lee Minji. We met in college, married young, thought we had everything figured out. We tried for years to have children, went through every fertility treatment available. When she finally got pregnant, we were over the moon." So-young settled beside him on the couch, sensing the importance of this moment, the trust he was placing in her by sharing his story. She was about 6 months along when we found out the baby had severe complications. The doctor said there was very little chance of survival, and if the baby did survive, the quality of life would be... He paused, his voice catching. "Minji wanted to continue the pregnancy anyway. She said every life was precious, that we had to try. But I was terrified, not just of losing the baby, but of watching her suffer. of the financial burden, of not being strong enough to handle it all. We fought constantly. I said terrible things, tried to convince her to terminate the pregnancy. I thought I was being practical, realistic. She thought I was being heartless. The stress of it all, the things we said to each other, it poisoned everything between us. So Young reached out and covered his hand with hers, offering silent comfort. She lost the baby in the 7th month. Junho continued, his voice barely above a whisper. A stillbirth. We held our daughter for exactly 43 minutes before they took her away. Minji blamed me for not wanting her enough, for not having faith. I blame myself too. We divorced 6 months later. I threw myself into work, built this perfect empty life, and told myself I was better off alone. The apartment was silent, except for the quiet hum of the heating system and the distant sounds of Seoul's nightlife far below. So Young struggled to find words adequate to such profound loss. "I'm so sorry," she whispered finally. "I can't imagine what that must have been like." "The worst part," Junho admitted, "is that I convinced myself I didn't deserve to be a father, that my reaction during the pregnancy proved I wasn't cut out for it. But these past few months with Harin, she's shown me that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I just needed to find the right family." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address directly. But something had shifted that night, a deepening of their connection that went beyond convenience or temporary arrangement. As winter deepened, their little family unit grew stronger. Junho taught Harin to ice skate at the outdoor rink in Seoul Plaza, holding her steady as she wobbled on the ice, cheering when she managed her first independent glide. So Young watched from the sidelines, her heart full as she saw her daughter's confidence bloom under Junho's patient encouragement. They celebrated Harin's 6th birthday with a party that filled the apartment with children's laughter and the chaos of wrapping paper and cake frosting. Junho had insisted on inviting her entire daycare class, and watching Harin's joy as she opened presents and played games with her friends, he felt a completeness he'd never experienced before. "Make a wish, sweetheart," So Young encouraged, as Harin prepared to blow out her candles. Harin closed her eyes tight, made her silent wish, then blew out all 6 candles in one breath. Later, when the guests had gone home and they were cleaning up the party debris, Junho asked her what she'd wished for. "I can't tell you, or it won't come true," Harin said solemnly, "but it's something really, really good." Spring arrived, early that year, painting Seoul in cherry blossoms and bringing with it a sense of new beginnings. So Young's job was going well, and she'd been promoted to a full-time position with benefits. She had enough money saved now for a down payment on an apartment, enough stability to move out and reclaim their independence. But the apartment listings she'd printed out remained untouched on her desk, and conversations about moving became increasingly half-hearted. The truth was, none of them wanted this arrangement to end. They had become a family in all but name, and the thought of separation felt like tearing apart something precious and irreplaceable. It was Harin who finally forced the issue with the directness that only children possess. "Why do we have to move?" she asked one evening at dinner. "I like living here with Junho Oppa. Can't we just stay forever?" So Young and Junho exchanged glances across the table, both recognizing the moment of truth they'd been avoiding. "Well," So Young said carefully, "Junho Oppa has his own life, sweetheart. We can't just stay here forever without making it official somehow." "What do you mean official?" Harin asked. Before So Young could answer, Junho set down his chopsticks and looked directly at her. "What if we did make it official?" The question hung in the air like a bridge waiting to be crossed. So Young felt her heart rate accelerate, understanding the enormity of what he was suggesting. "Junho," she began. "I know it sounds crazy," he continued quickly. "I know we haven't talked about feelings or the future or any of the things people usually discuss before making this kind of decision. But I love Harin like she's my own daughter. And I care about you more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. We work well together. We make each other happy. Isn't that enough to build something real on?" Harin looked back, and fourth between the adults, sensing the importance of the conversation, even if she didn't understand all the implications. "You want to marry Ioma?" she asked Junho directly. "I want us to be a real family," he replied. "All three of us, officially and forever." So Young felt tears prick her eyes. In all her dreams of finding love and security for herself and her daughter, she'd never imagined it could happen like this, gradually, naturally, built on friendship and daily kindness rather than grand romantic gestures. "But we're not. We haven't..." She struggled to articulate her concerns. "We haven't been romantic," Junho finished for her. "But we care about each other. We respect each other. We want the same things for Harin. Love can grow from that foundation, can't it?" That night after Harin had gone to bed, they talked until dawn. They discussed the practical aspects of marriage, the emotional risks they'd be taking, the changes it would mean for all of them. They talked about their fears, their hopes, their vision of what their family could become. "I need you to know," So Young said, as the first light of morning began to filter through the windows. "I haven't told you everything about Harin's father." Junho waited, sensing another revelation coming. "It wasn't just that he left when I told him I was pregnant," she continued. "It was more complicated than that. We were both very young, both scared. He wanted me to terminate the pregnancy, said he wasn't ready to be a father. When I refused, he said some terrible things, accused me of trying to trap him, said the baby might not even be his." She paused, gathering courage for the most difficult part. "The truth is, I was seeing someone else around the same time. Just briefly, just a few dates, but there was a possibility that Harin wasn't his biological daughter. He demanded a paternity test, but by then I was so hurt and angry that I told him to just leave us alone. I never got the test done. I raised Harin on my own, and I've never looked back." Junho absorbed this information quietly. "Does any of that change how you feel about her?" "Of course not," So Young said immediately. "She's my daughter in every way that matters." "Then it doesn't change how I feel either," Junho replied simply. "Biology doesn't make a family, love does." 2 months later, on a perfect Seoul spring day with cherry blossoms falling like confetti, they were married in a small ceremony in the same park where they'd first met. Harin served as their flower girl, scattering petals with serious concentration and beaming with pride as her mother and Junho exchanged simple vows of love, commitment, and promise to always put their family first. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment period, as all marriages are. They had to learn to navigate the shift from roommates to spouses, to balance their individual needs with their commitment to each other and to Harin. There were moments of uncertainty, times when the foundation of their relationship felt shaky because it hadn't been built on traditional romance, but there were also moments of profound joy and connection. The first time So Young told him she loved him, whispered in the darkness of their shared bedroom 6 months after their wedding. The night Harin had a nightmare and called for Appa instead of Junho Oppa, making his heart swell with pride and belonging. The gradual realization that what they'd built together was stronger than many relationships that had started with passion, because it was built on genuine respect, shared values, and daily choice to love each other. Harin thrived in their stable, loving home. She excelled in school, made friends easily, and showed a natural talent for art that reminded Junho of his own creative instincts. He enrolled her in art classes, spent weekends teaching her about design and architecture, watched with pride as her confidence and talents grew. But it was on Harin's 8th birthday that their world shifted on its axis once again. The party was winding down, and Harin was opening her last few presents when she unwrapped a gift from her art teacher, a DNA ancestry kit that had become popular among families wanting to learn about their heritage. "This is so cool!" Harin exclaimed. "We can find out where our family came from." So Young felt a chill of apprehension, but Junho seemed genuinely interested. "That could be fun," he agreed. "We could all do it together, see what we discover about our backgrounds." That evening, As they prepared the DNA samples according to the kit's instructions, So-young felt increasingly anxious. She'd never told Junho the identity of the other man she'd been seeing when Harin was conceived, had convinced herself it didn't matter since they were a family now, regardless of biology. But as she watched Harin carefully following the instructions, chattering excitedly about what countries they might be connected to, she realized she might need to prepare for the possibility that their family's origin story was more complicated than any of them had imagined. The results arrived 6 weeks later, in official-looking envelopes that seemed to pulse with potential life-changing information. They decided to open them together during their usual family dinner, turning it into a celebration of discovery. Junho opened his first, reading aloud about his heritage, predominantly Korean with some Chinese and Japanese ancestry, exactly what he'd expected based on his family history. So-young's results were similarly unsurprising: Korean and Chinese heritage, with a small percentage of Mongolian ancestry that explained her slightly broader features. But when they opened Harin's envelope, the room fell silent. The genetic breakdown showed Korean, Chinese, and Japanese ancestry that perfectly matched Junho's profile. But more shocking was the section labeled Close Family Matches, listed. At the top, with 99.7% certainty, was Min Junho, father. The paper trembled in So-young's hands as the implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. Harin was Junho's biological daughter, the man who had raised her, loved her, chosen her. He had been her father all along. "I don't understand," Harin said, looking at the confused faces of her parents. "What does this mean?" Junho took the paper from So-young's numb fingers, reading and rereading the results as if they might change. His mind raced backward, trying to make sense of this impossible revelation. 8 years ago. 8.5 years ago, to be precise. His marriage to Minji had been falling apart. They'd been fighting constantly about the pregnancy, about the future, about everything. He'd been working late, drinking too much, making terrible decisions. There had been a company party, a beautiful young woman who worked for one of their client companies, someone he'd noticed but never spoken to before that night. They'd talked, commiserated about their respective relationship problems, had too much to drink. One night, one mistake that had seemed insignificant at the time, a moment of weakness and poor judgment that he'd regretted immediately and never repeated. He'd never even learned her full name, had avoided her at subsequent business functions, had buried the memory of that night deep in his consciousness as his marriage continued to crumble and his life fell apart. But now, looking at this beautiful 8-year-old girl who called him Appa and had his eyes, his stubborn chin, his artistic sensibilities, he realized that his moment of weakness had created the greatest gift of his life. "So young," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "That night, 8 years ago, the company party at the Schiller Hotel, you were wearing a blue dress." So-young's eyes filled with tears as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "You were married. You seemed so sad and I was so lonely. We talked about books and architecture and we made Harin," Junho finished, reaching across the table to take her hand. Harin looked back and forth between them, beginning to understand. "You're my real Appa, my biological Appa. I'm your real Appa either way," Junho said, kneeling beside her chair and pulling her into his arms. "But yes, it turns out I'm your biological father too. We found each other by accident, and we've been a family all along without even knowing it." The revelation recontextualized everything about their relationship. The instant connection Junho had felt to Harin, the way she'd seemed familiar from the very first day, the natural ease with which they'd fallen into family routines, the sense that they belonged together that had transcended logic or conventional romance. "This is the best birthday present ever," Harin declared, hugging Junho tightly. "I wished for us to be a real family forever, and we already were." That night, after Harin had gone to bed, So-young and Junho sat together processing the magnitude of what they'd discovered. All this time, So Young whispered, I kept thinking Ha-rin was lucky to have found a father figure in you. But you were her father all along. And I kept thinking I was getting a second chance at fatherhood, Junho replied, when really I was just finally meeting the daughter I'd never known I had. They talked through the night about fate and coincidence, about the paths that had led them to each other, not once, but twice. They marveled at the universe's strange sense of timing, the way their daughter had been the bridge that brought them together while carrying both their DNA in her cells. Do you think we would have found each other anyway? So Young asked as dawn broke over Seoul. If Ha-rin hadn't needed help that day in the playground, if circumstances had been different, Junho considered this, thinking about all the near misses and chance encounters that had shaped their story. I think Ha-rin would have found a way to bring us together eventually. She's pretty determined when she wants something. The next few months brought adjustments as they processed their new understanding of their family's origin story. They decided to tell Ha-rin the full truth about how they'd met the first time, explaining it in age-appropriate terms that emphasized the love that had brought them all together rather than the complicated circumstances of adult relationships. Ha-rin absorbed this information with the resilience of childhood, incorporating it into her understanding of their family in a way that made it feel natural and right. She began telling people that her appa had loved her even before he knew she existed, which made both So Young and Junho tear up every time they heard it. The revelation also deepened the romantic connection between So Young and Junho, knowing that they shared a biological child, that their love story had begun years before they'd realized it, added a layer of destiny to their relationship that transformed their practical partnership into something profound and unshakable. We were connected all along, So Young said one evening as they watched Ha-rin play in their garden, now 9 years old and growing more beautiful and talented every day. Even when we didn't know each other's names, even when we thought that night was just a mistake, we were already family. The best mistakes sometimes turn out to be the greatest blessings, Junho replied, wrapping his arms around his wife and marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. As Ha-rin grew older, she never tired of hearing the story of how her parents had found each other twice, once by accident, once by design, both times by love. She understood instinctively that theirs was a special kind of family, one that had been created not by conventional romance, but by the mysterious workings of fate and the power of choosing to love someone every day. Years later, when Ha-rin was preparing to leave for university with plans to study architecture like her father, she would tell people that her parents had taught her the most important lesson of her life, that family isn't just about blood or birth circumstances, but about the daily choice to love, support, and care for each other, no matter what challenges life brings. And in their Seoul apartment, now filled with Ha-rin's artwork, family photos, and the accumulated memories of a decade of shared life, So Young and Junho would continue to marvel at the beautiful complexity of their story, how a single night of weakness had become the foundation for a lifetime of strength, how a chance encounter in a playground had revealed a connection that had existed all along, and how sometimes the family you're meant to have finds you in the most unexpected ways. The man who had raised her for 5 years without knowing she was his had discovered that love doesn't always follow the rules of logic or timing. Sometimes it creates its own perfect sense of order, bringing together the people who belong with each other exactly when they're ready to recognize what they've found. And in the end, that recognition of love, of family, of belonging was the greatest gift any of them could have asked for.